Good morning from London. Thank you all for joining today's event. It's great to see so many of you in attendance already for what will be an insightful and practical look into one of the most pressing issues for General Counsel and lawyers in general in Belgium. My name is Jamie Ryat. I am the head of research for the Legal 500 GC Powerless series, meaning I've had the great pleasure to talk to in-house counsel all over the world and recognise their achievements, including in Belgium and the Benelux region, where we've been since 2019. First things first, let me please thank our partners, Sirius Legal, without whom today's webinar would not be possible. I would also like to thank our speakers for joining us. They will all be given a proper introduction shortly, but before that's done, I will very briefly outline the content. Okay. Now, I don't think anyone watching will need to be convinced about the potential seriousness of a cyber attack. Phone call in the early hours telling you that the data breach has occurred, or news that your company's systems have been compromised, are just two of the nightmare scenarios for GCs and clients everywhere. Dramatic increase in working from home practices have increased security risks even further, with employees taking home, exchanging sensitive company information. This is a reality that many of you will be dealing with. Stakes are high, so this topic really is one of extreme and urgent. Therefore, this webinar is designed to give you the essential knowledge on the practical steps that you can take to mitigate, manage, and overcome cyber incidents. Our speakers will impart lessons, share best practices, and insights about the challenging and thought-provoking field of cybersecurity. So, if there's one thing that you should take away from my short opening speech here, is that these sessions work best when we have input from you, our audience. Therefore, I encourage you all to submit your questions via the Q&A tab, so our speakers can address anything relevant. Now, without further ado, please allow me to introduce our distinguished panelists for this webinar. First, we have Bart van den Brander, an attorney at law at Sirius Legal. Roland Lembretz, also an attorney at law at Sirius Legal. We have Jan Guldentops, CEO and open source and security consultant for Better Access. And finally, we have Mark Vale, Global Chief Information Security. Moderating today's session will be Bart van den Brander, who I will now hand over to in order to begin the webinar proper. Bart, it's great to have you, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and good morning, everyone. I hope this is going to be an interesting morning, and I also hope that we will not run into any technical issues along the way. If there are any questions from the participants, please do ask them in the chat. I am moderating. I'll try to pick them up and forward your question to the panel during the presentation. We won't wait until the end of the presentation to ask questions, so do drop them on the go. We'll try to weave them into the story. Understanding potential cybersecurity risks and the path to compliance in Belgium. Cybersecurity over the past few years has exploded. The number of incidents, the number of companies that run into gigantic trouble in the cybersecurity field is we've lost count in the meantime. I think that Jan will give a few examples later on in the presentation. So this is something that has become very important, not only to the tech people in a company, but also to the legal department in a company, and that's why we wanted to organize this webinar today, to give you as the legal responsible within your organization, legal person within your organization, a chance to catch up on a few of the legal background topics that you need to be aware of as it goes to cybersecurity, but to give you also a bit of technical know-how, a bit of understanding of how cybersecurity risks or how cybersecurity works, what you should be aware of, what you should be careful with. And that is why we have asked two of the great minds in Belgium in the field to join us today. The panel is composed of, on the one hand, Roland Lembretz, my partner at a Sirius Legal law firm. Roland is working on cybersecurity very intensively. He has been doing so for quite some time now. We have authored the Belgian chapter in the Cybersecurity International Comparative Legal Guide last year, and this year The guide you'll see under our names. If any of the participants are interested in getting this guide and read through it themselves, we will be giving away 5 hard copies at the end of the presentation. And also 10 digital copies of our chapter, 5 copies of the entire guide, which is a comparative legal guide with 20 to 25 jurisdictions, I think. So we'll give you an email address at the end of the presentation where you can drop us a message, and the first 5 will get a hard copy of the guide. Apart from Roland, we have Jan Guldentops and Mark Vaal, 2 experienced lecturers, 2 experienced people in the field of cybersecurity. Jan is the managing partner, the owner of BA in Leuven. I've had the pleasure of meeting Jan over the past few years on several occasions. I've seen him talk in front of an audience. I hope he will perform as well as I've been seeing him, as I've seen him do in the past. And we also have Mark Vaal today. Mark is the CISO of ESCO, and will try to give us his experience as a CISO, but also as a lecturer on cybersecurity issues at Antwerp Management School. He will try to give his view from day-to-day practice, and we'll try to make this as interactive as possible today. So let's get started. Do ask all of your questions. We've said that before. I'll just mention that Jan and Roland, we have known Jan for quite some time, but we have the opportunity and the honor to really partner with Jan and his company today as well. Agentschap Innoveren en Ondernemen VLAIO, the Flemish government, has started a funding plan for small and medium-sized companies in December that allows small and medium-sized companies to run cybersecurity awareness programs within the company and get funding for that. Serious Legal and BA are one of the companies that has been chosen by the Flemish government to offer those programs to small and medium-sized companies. If you want to know more about that, you can go to the VLAIO or Agentschap Innoveren website, and you'll find everything about our offer in cybersecurity projects on that website. All right, let's dive into the matter. Thunderstorm season has started, ladies and gentlemen. If you look at the number of incidents that has been reported in the press over the past years, one might get depressed. And the last and most recent one, I had a few other examples in mind to start discussion today, but then yesterday morning I read my newspaper online, and one that has been popping up since December and that keeps coming back. And I think that Jan and Mark may have some interesting insights or opinions on that problem. One that has been popping up since December is the security issues that Microsoft is experiencing in their Exchange service. Roland, you can move on in the slides if you can. Anyone in the audience? Well, most of you in the audience probably, but anyone in the audience using Microsoft Exchange within their company, are you sure that your company is not in the 2021 victim list of companies that have been under attack so far? Can you, Roland?
Yes. Nobody's going to say that out loud, of course.
Nobody is going to say it out loud. No, that's true. I was waiting in the chat for people to say, yes, we have been hacked, but they're not going to tell us that, are they? 250,000 companies worldwide are potentially harmed by the Exchange server problem that Microsoft is experiencing, has been experiencing since December. Those are numbers coming from Digit. In Belgium, there is some debate on how many companies have been touched or might be touched. Figures go from 400 to 1,100, potentially 4,000. I read this morning in another article, depending on the source that you consult. Not all of those are big international corporations. There are schools, there are non-profit organizations, small and medium-sized companies, everybody. And what is frightening is that the number of attacks has been doubling hour by hour, day by day, over the past few weeks. This is a worldwide issue, and this is only the last in a series of incidents where often China-based, Russia-based hackers use flaws in the security of the software that we use every day to hack into your system. And for the time being, this is just hacking and getting access to data. But what we've seen over the past few weeks, and I am not a technical person, so I'll be careful on on not expressing the how and why. We'll listen to that later on with Jan and Mark. But over the past few weeks, we've seen the virus mutate, let's call it like that. It's like COVID-19 that now has its Brazilian variant. We've seen this problem mutate into a situation where from data leaks, we've gone to ransomware versions. The Dear Cry version of the issue has already popped up, and now we see companies where ransomware is being installed through this leak, and companies will have to pay dearly to get their servers liberated after they've been blocked with ransomware. We'll listen to Jan perhaps later on. Jan, I think you have your story, your side of the story on this with a lot more expertise than I have from a technical perspective. Maybe some first insights on what is exactly going on in the entire exchange story.
Well, Roland, do you have my slides?
There at the end of the
about that. Well, what's basically happened is there's a couple of things that's completely the Hafnium story exposes everything that is wrong in the way we do security. Right? We're doing really a panic story now, right? And the guy doing the article, it's probably in there somewhere. I'll get the article, right? It's this one. So it's of the way we are doing this. We're doing FUD, fear, uncertainty, and doubt, right? And we basically are saying the end is near. It's like almost like Jehovah's Witnesses, right? You know, Jehovah's Witnesses changed the date. The world's gonna end 8 times, right? I've seen in 25 years, I've seen the end of the world completely, right? It's like the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. And if you read this article, there are a number of factual mistakes in it, right? And Roland, if you can take my next slide. One of the things is, what is happening? It's a nasty, dangerous bug, right? Yes, that's true. It is dangerous. It is a problem if you do not patch your servers, right? But we have had these kinds of issues every week. We have a comparable bug for other software, right? We had a bug last year in which you don't need access to the server. You just need somebody to type a domain name, an address, and it hacks your AD. That's a lot worse. This bug has been known since January, right? It's 4 exploits. Every sensible organization doing real security work has patched this already. And that's where the problem is. I like your quote, Bart, that you say storm season is here, right? But security and doing security work and securing your environment is not weather, it's climate. It's something you do permanently. It's not a season.
Yeah.
And that's one of the problems we have. If you can get the next slide, and it's the elephant in the room, right? It's happening before, and we are all acting like firefighters, right? We're rushing, we're in panic, we're buying stuff, right? While we should be working as fire prevention, right? We should get into our minds that all our organizations will be permanently under attack, will be permanently having to work to fix this. And you have to do this in an internal system, right? You have to really create what the bullshit term is an information security management system, but an internal system to keep your security up to date. And for me personally, the best way to approach this is the circle of Deming. It's what we do in quality. You plan, you do, you check, and you act. And that's a permanent process you should have internally. I don't know what you think about that, Mark.
I'm convinced that this is another case. In 25 years of security work, you always see an increase, and the internet, of course, has put us in new challenges. But saying that this is new, no, for me it's normal business. We had SolarWinds before. Then before that, we had other cases. In the press, only the tip of the iceberg meets what is spectacular when there's a high element. For people like me who are working on this day by day, it depends. One, what do you have in your company as information and software running? Two, how well are your people trained? And I'm not just talking about the people working, but also the IT people, because they also do not get a lot of opportunity to be trained. Three, it's also to do with your customers. What do they expect from you? And with whom do you work? Who are your suppliers? If somebody says, oh, I have Office 365, yeah, but who's hosting that? So for me, it's, yes, it makes the media. So I'm happy that security again is on the front page of certain newspapers and in the news. So it puts the highlight on it, but there's so many other things that have to be dealt with. And I think, and that's the goal of today, is to help people in legal counsel or in the legal profession to understand how to cooperate and communicate with security people, with IT people, on this case, to better understand. And I think the mission of me today is to make sure that you as audience understands what we're saying, what you and I have to work with. I work very closely with my legal counsel at ESCO, but it's a global phenomenon. And so, yeah, weaknesses will always be there. It's a fact of life. As long as software exists, there's always been bugs in it. The only thing is that the ramifications, the impact, if it's a global one like Microsoft or something that's used by a lot of companies, then of course it makes headlines. Heartbleed, that was like, a lot of years ago. I think it's like 6 or 7 years ago. That made a lot of headlines. That was an open source used by major vendors. Nobody knew about it until somebody found out. So it's not a new phenomenon. It's just that it's good that sometimes the element of security is put forward. Of course, and Jan, you're right. Hackers or cyber criminals want to take advantage, quick money, short time, and every opportunity that they see, as Roland and Bart already mentioned, as soon as there's something on the market as a opening, a vulnerability, they will try to exploit that and ransomware or whatever. So the goal is that we have to protect ourselves, but we have to first do our job, and then we have to work together with other people.
I think that's the most important thing lawyers should remember. Is you have the saying debt and taxes, right? I always say debt, taxes, and lawyers, but security is one of them. It's not going to disappear. It's going to be there for the rest of your career, right? It's going to be something we work at all the time. And just to give you an example, right? I had my students set up as a project a number of honeypots. And honeypots are systems that are connected to the internet and that invite, that have some vulnerabilities or apparent vulnerabilities. And the average honeypot gets attacked about 700 times an hour, right? So you're permanently under attack, everyone. So you have to approach this in a structural way. And that is the important thing.
Thank you,
What
Gary.
bothers me a lot is that it's always panic. We need to fix this. No.
Let's remember from that cybersecurity is, like Jan said, not a seasonal thing. It's a climate thing. You should be aware of that through the entire cycle of your company. I have a few questions up until now in the Q&A and in the chat. I'd like to ask everybody to ask their questions in the chat. That is easier to follow up upon. We won't be able to answer everyone's questions during the presentation today, but we'll try to answer all of your questions by email afterwards if you send us an email so that we can reach out to you. So if your question has not been addressed during the presentations, do send us an email in the end and we will get back to you in the upcoming days. A few of the questions, guys, before we dive into the legal background that Roland is going to give us, a few questions already to think about. We will come back to them in a few minutes, but I'll already ask the question now. Someone in the panel, I think we have addressed that question, says, with tech and risk constantly changing, what is the best way to stress test how vulnerable our company is to cyber threats or to a breach? In other words, how should I assess the vulnerability of my company? Somebody else asks, everybody in our company is working at home right now. What new threats should I be aware of in this period of home working? And let me already add to that from a legal perspective and from a data protection GDPR background, that having strong and good home working policies, that's the lawyer speaking, apart from technical issues, but strong home working policies so that your employees know what they can and cannot do and what they should and should not do is a start. And think about distant working and have fixed working methods on distance working is a start. We'll get into the technical questions after Roland's presentation. One's very specific. How can a company prevent an authentication hacking attack? That seems to be the latest worry for us as a council. Maybe Jan and Mark also in a few minutes, we'd like to have your views on those. But first, let's listen to Roland, who will try to give us an overview on rules and regulations and evolutions in the legal landscape over the past few years. And the law as it is today, the basic knowledge you should have on rules and regulations. Roland?
Yes, thank you, Bart, and good morning, everyone. For today, we have, I believe, 4 topics. And the first topic was cybersecurity landscape and legal evolutions. You already heard the discussion about the right information on cybersecurity and what's the problem with cyber attacks and cybercrime. And that's a key problem where we have to start. Cybersecurity has been a difficult issue in any business for years and has never, I believe, received the attention it deserves. But however, the reason why it has had so little attention is logical for me. It's like fighting an unknown enemy. Look like the difficulties with COVID-19 we have. We are not directly visually confronted with cybercrime, or we haven't had any direct bad experience with it, or not every one of us. And it's difficult to measure, so that a correct risk assessment quickly seems like a theoretical exercise. And we've never been trained in school, at least, plus it is still too little part of the social and corporate culture. So one of the other dangers is that we have too little knowledge. We are not sufficiently aware of the impact that a cyber incident can have on the company. And that's why I show you here the Dunning-Kruger effect. This graphic shows us the psychological phenomenon in which an ignorant person considers himself to be above average competent in terms of knowledge. And that is what is called here, as you see here first, the peak of Mr. Stupid. You don't know anything, but you have excessive confidence in yourself and the situation. And many companies, I believe, are at this point. We will see when the problem occurs. Let's go on, business continuity, but it's the business continuity that will become a problem in case of a cyber incident. Later on, as you build up the knowledge, as you can see in the graphic, you will end up first in what they say, the valley of despair. You're getting through the slope of enlightenment, and you will end on the plateau of sustainability. So the key point here is try to avoid the Dunning-Kruger effect by informing yourself as well as possible in all areas. And so let me first give you some other information that Bart already give you, that Jan already give you, and Mark already give you. And now we can see, if we search on the internet and who carefully reads the news platforms, you can find on a daily basis different articles about cyber attacks. That's your first line of free information, of course. If you follow the various cybersecurity vendors, you can find numerous threatening statistics about today's cyber risk. That's your second line of free information. But I believe you have to be very careful with those statistics and conclusions. The strategy of those vendors is still selling by instilling fear. And the fact that vendor statistics are overestimated and not fully applicable on the Belgian situation can be deduced from a scientific study of the University of Leuven. I believe it was in 2018 or 2019. And that was entitled "The Impact of Cybercrime on Belgian Businesses." And the conclusion in that study was very brief, that the impact was much lower than what emerges in the statistics of the vendors. On the other hand, this study pointed also out that there was a risk of underreporting. But in my opinion, the difference here was very striking with the statistics of the vendors. But in any case, I think it would be useful to take a brief look at some official statistics and trends. That always helps. And in first place, we have the police crime statistics between 2000 and 2019. You can see here all the statistics. And the most important are phishing and ransomware. What do we see? We see that phishing had 51 reports in 2009, while 10 years later, in 2019, there were already 2,365 reports. If you compare 2016 with 2019, we see a tenfold increase in the number of reports. Second, ransomware, quite important, was only included in the statistics in 2016. When there were 49 reports, in 2019, we see 177 reports, which is almost 4 times as much. This trend in Belgium, we can see also on an international level, and that's the first place. First is Interpol, and that's an international organization for our police. And Interpol reports that there is, due to COVID-19, an increase of 59% in phishing and an increase of 36% in malware. Europol reports a number of striking trends in its annual report. It's called Yocta 2020 here, but we have also Yocta 2910 and so on. And what are the trends? What are the conclusions? First, cybercrime as a service is emerging. That's whereby every person can call on the services of a cyber criminal, what says so anyone can be your attacker. Business email compromise is rising. Online investment fraud needs more attention, and ransomware is the absolute dominant threat. The third one, that's not the police statistics. I believe it's Mark that has put it, the ENISA here on the slide. Maybe he can.
Yes. So thanks. So when I saw Interpol and Europol, I also wanted to focus on ENISA. ENISA is the European Network Information Security Agency, basically also guiding not just governments, but also the general public on security. They've got a new mandate recently, and they produce every year a publication on the risks that they see happening in Europe, affecting companies with advice. And I would invite you all to go to enisa.europe.eu, and there you'll find the publication they do. They're high quality publications, very understandable on a lot of topics, including the cyber threats. They do that now, I think, for the 5th or 6th year, and so it's very interesting. And indeed, what you're saying, indeed, is that there's an increase, and the importance of training and awareness for people is very, very key in that, in combination with keeping up to date with news about the tools that are used in a company. So that's a little bit what the ETL report is every year.
Yeah, absolutely. And the ENISA has a lot of recommendations and advices. It's a very helpful website, good for everyone who works on compliance on cybersecurity. That's right.
Yep.
To go through my slides, what I would like to say is also what are the political consequences of these trends. And it's of course the World Economic Forum, and they are also aware of the problem and increasing problem of cybersecurity. And they put cybersecurity on the agenda of the annual meeting in Davos. It was in December 2020, and they referred there to various studies. And what are the main findings from those studies? I put it here in my slides very shortly. It was the first question. When asked what is the most worrisome for your company, it appears that almost 50% of the respondents report cyber attacks and data frauds. This is the third highest percentage, where only the prolonged recession and the surge in bankruptcies had a higher score. So that's pretty high. To the question, which of the following technology objectives, if any, have become a greater priority for your organization due to the influence of the coronavirus outbreak, the top scores go to information security and business continuity and resilience with 44.7% and 42%. So in any case, with the information we have given you now, I believe the conclusion is simple. Cybersecurity must be higher on the agenda in the following years for every company. And that's what we also see in the legislative evolutions. It's going to be very short because our time is also short, and I want to open the discussion, of course. But what we see for Belgium, is here on my slide, I call it the hardcore cybersecurity law, which was in the earlier years. It had a smaller scope. I'm talking here about our law on the protection of privacy with regards to the processing of personal data. It was the Belgian forerunner of the GDPR. I refer to the Act of 2005 concerning the electronic communications and the Act of 2011 on the security and protection of critical infrastructures. As I said, smaller scope. And enforcement was actually, for many companies, very limited. You could say that there was in practice no real authority that systematically, like now the Data Protection Authority, for example, imposed sanctions. And I think I can say that for the privacy legislation, our Act of 92, that wasn't really known by 90% of the lawyers. That's another case with the GDPR now, and then we see this new evolution since 2016 with the implementation of the GDPR, with the implementation of the NIS directive, which is a catalyst for taking adequate security measures, for required compliance, for mandatory reports in the event of a data breach or a cyber incident, and there is a clear sanction policy. Always with a national strategy. That's the goal from the European cybersecurity strategy, that there are different national strategies. And the breach of these obligations turns today any company into a perpetrator rather than a single victim in case of a cyber incident. And that's, for a company, a very important evolution. Non-compliance in cybersecurity is becoming more and more a criminal liability. And the transposition of this European legislation took place in 2018 for the GDPR law and 2019 for the NIS law, which is quite recent. And we see that in practice, its full operation and organization still has to be rolled out step by step. I mentioned in my slide here also the European Cybersecurity Act of 2019. That's again, the ENISA came into force at the same time, gives ENISA more powers to develop the European cybersecurity strategy and provides a general framework for the development of European standards for ICT products, services and processes. But this has also to be rolled out further and is mainly, I believe, in an advisory phase and consultation rounds. So the implementation of this legislation in practice is by no means finalized, and we are already seeing proposals being made to expand and structurally amend the NIS directive. The problem that is already being encountered is the fact that the NIS is steering towards national cybersecurity strategies, but these national strategies make the aim of harmonization problematic. Supervision and control are still insufficient, and the approach between different member states is very different. So that's short the evolution. But what do we see now in Belgium? The Belgian law. What do we have to remember today when it comes to cybersecurity in Belgian law? First one, it's everybody's issue. Practically every company processes personal data and will have to comply with the required security measures. The NIS directive currently applies to essential service providers and digital service providers, but all their suppliers will have to conform as well, as they will form part of the mandatory cybersecurity policy of the so-called NIS service providers. And after all, attacks in the whole supply chain are no exception. So it's everybody's issue. Second, today we don't have a one structured cybersecurity code, but we have a hodgepodge of various articles in different legal codes. I'm thinking about articles in criminal law, articles in labor law, company law, the code of economic law, administrative law, and separate legislation applicable to different sectors. This makes structural legal compliance in cybersecurity a complex challenge. Number three, and that's moreover, the existing legislation is not up to date. To give an example, to be able as a company to consult and or check business emails of your staff for a good cybersecurity policy for the continuity of your businesses, we see that there is no workable legal structure and that you will become guilty of hacking actually very quickly, in theory. For the legislation is, I believe, inadequate. Also, for example, if you use white hackers like for example, for let's say a penetration test or as part of your cybersecurity policy, the use of hacker tools will in principle still be punishable even for those white hackers. A modern legal framework should also be provided here. And five, as a result, we are all dependent on the enforcement authorities. That's a result of this inadequacy and the major legislation. We see in practice that every company is nowadays dependent on the enforcement policy of the competent authorities, which in itself leads to legal uncertainty. Okay, now with the slides. I don't know if someone want to tell something else about this topic, or are we going to
It would be interesting to hear, Mark, perhaps a bit difficult for you because you say I work a lot with my legal officer. So any question I ask you on how to work with legal people from a technical perspective and the awareness they have of the legal background that is involved in cybersecurity would require you to talk about your colleague. So I'll ask the question to Jan. Jan, if you get in touch with clients, do you have the feeling that from a legal point of view, they know where legal risks, compliance risks may lay, compliance risks on the one hand and liability risks on the other hand?
Well, I would, first of all, I would like to point something out, something that's really damaging implementations of GDPR in Belgium is the way the Belgian government approached it, right? There are legal fines for everyone except for the government. And that's the completely wrong message to everyone, right? The first thing. Secondly, legal, there is so much difference in level in legal staff you find, right? I meet DPOs who are basically lawyers who don't have a clue what it's about. And I meet lawyers who really are well versed in everything they should get to from a legal viewpoint. It's really, it's very different within in the different institutions. But the trick is And I do this within the Flemish Data Protection Agency, which is called the VPC. I'm the only non-lawyer member in there. So, and the nice thing about it is that you can work as a team. That if they're talking about encryption, it's usually from a bit abstract. Well, I can tell them, okay, encryption works like this, and it doesn't work like that, right? And that's the difference in there. So one of the things I would advise lawyers is to be multidisciplinary, to talk to disciplines about what they're doing and inform themselves. A tip I always give to my customers when it's about IT and security is if you have that security guy walk in or that IT guy walk in, and he explains you something and you don't understand, then it's not your fault, it's the IT guy's fault. And he probably doesn't understand well himself if he can't explain it to you that you understand, right? So be persistent, keep asking questions, use the most important security product in the field. Mark, what's the most important security product, in my opinion?
I was just going to reflect, Jan, that you were saying, I always ask to people, even IT people, explain to me as if I was a 6-year-old child.
Yeah, but it's that way. If somebody cannot explain this on your level, he doesn't understand himself.
Yeah, when I started in IT, a long time ago, dinosaur years ago, I was able to say, yes, I cover IT because it's a mainframe with a network, with some terminals, and that was it. Now, the world is very complex. It's becoming very complex. IT has a lot of, has made a lot of mistakes in making it more complex. Decisions are made, that's fine. And we're also living in a world where the business is pushing a lot of pressure on IT to make things available very fast. It has to work 24/7. It has to be looking nice. And they don't care where the data is sitting. And I think that's the main trouble that I see. So it's a human aspect, Jan. So if you're referring to the human element, yes. But it's also decisions made by people under pressure of, IT or the business or customers. And so what you see is that people go fast. They go for the short corners, the shortcuts. And it's becoming worrisome. I was interviewing a really good CIO who retired recently, and I was talking to him and say, okay, what do you think happened? And he said, yeah, the biggest problem that we see is that this complexity where IT is pushed to bring solutions not properly tested, not properly validated, with not good foundations, just to make sure that the customer or the employee or the boss is happy. That's the thing of today. Everything is connected, everything is service, and it's becoming very, very difficult to do the whole chain from the customer up till the supplier and verify everything. And every company, even a law firm, is sitting in between. Even law firms use IT systems, So and in that sense, it's important to see that the human aspect, but also the decisions. And yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's the sign of the times that it has to be fast, quick. Good is good enough. It doesn't have to be perfect. But I think the human element here is very important.
That creates one of the biggest problems I see, right? Is I do not have to understand it on a meta level, right? It's the IT's problem. It's the security guy's problem. And that creates a lot of issues. And, I always say that I only sell one product as a company. I sell common sense as a service.
Yeah.
And I like that. I walk into a boardroom, there is a problem, and people start throwing terminology at me, right? They're saying, we want to go into the cloud with an IIS infrastructure, blah, 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 blah. And then after 10 minutes, you say, and what is the real problem now?
Yeah. And what do you want to solve, basically? Yeah, and it's also maybe one element I want to add here, Bart and Roland, is also the accountability. You can outsource to whoever you want, to Microsoft, to whoever you want, Amazon, you as a company remain accountable. And I think lawyers are the best place to understand the difference between accountability, responsibility, using tools, etc. But it's an element. I saw a question about outsourcing. Yeah, sure. You don't have to. A law firm is not an IT company, so you don't have to be with a data center and things like that with hundreds of IT people. You can outsource, but you remain accountable. If something happens and that system fails or that supplier fails miserably, you are accountable. And I think that's the key element here.
Thank you, Mark. That brings me back to something Jan already mentioned, and an interesting question for Roland, perhaps. We at Serious Legal have a strong background in GDPR compliance, which is only a partial aspect of security, of securing data within your organization. A question that pops up very often with the legal department that we talk to in the context of GDPR compliance is, what is the balance between, or the relationship between GDPR compliance on the one hand, ISO 27001 certifications on the other hand, and ascertaining cybersecurity within your organization on a broader level? In other words, how does the puzzle fit together? How should I start? What is the starting point? Should I work on cybersecurity as a whole first and then dive into GDPR compliance? Should I get the ISO compliance first so that I have a view on internal flows and organization and data flows within my organization as a whole, and then start working on GDPR compliance and maybe take cybersecurity as a next? How should I, as an organization, start working on all of those aspects, and how do they relate to each other? That is a very broad question, I think. The same principles keep coming back. You mentioned accountability, Mark. Accountability is typically something that comes to surface in GDPR compliance. I understand that we should have a look at it from a broader perspective, also when it comes to cybersecurity as a whole. So that is perhaps now more than a question, or more than one question. But do any of you want to dive into that?
Okay, let me take a stake at that. Indeed, it's a very broad question, but I think, first of all, there has to be a mandate from executive management. I mean, without a mandate from executive management, it's suicide, whoever takes it on. So management first has to be given a good overview of the current status of cybersecurity and privacy in a company, based on some by preference objective criteria, and then they can say, okay, let's define the actions. First of all, there should be a coordinator. I don't think it should be a security officer or a thing like that, but somebody who is the focal point to address all questions to. Same with privacy, a DPO. Well, if you don't need a DPO, somebody who coordinates privacy. Can be legal, can be somebody else, doesn't matter. But people you can go to as a central hub for information. That's one. Two, from a cybersecurity, forget ISO. ISO is outdated. It's going to be replaced this year, hopefully. But it's a kind of a nice framework. But for me, it's too old. It doesn't fit anymore to the current needs. It's a nice standard. It's international. But for me, it's dated. I personally think that from a cybersecurity perspective, I think I should start with, and I call it information security. And information security, I'm sorry for the lawyers, but all information contains personal information. So for me, information security is bigger than personal information. Sorry, but the Venn diagram is what it is. And so in that sense, yes, if you start defining a system by which you protect your information with a classification of, okay, this is very important, this is intellectual property, this is something contractual, so we have to maintain that for retention, etc., etc. You feel that you have to bring a lot of stakeholders around the table, from the business who bring in the money, but from the supporting units as well, like quality management, IT, etc. So from that perspective, start with that first, and then you can then go to legal compliance. And yes, GDPR was already, as you rightly said, Roland and Bart, it's not new. It was already since '92 the case, but it's nice to have this big clubber stick, and once in a while the data protection authorities club somebody and say, and everyone's like, ooh, we have to do something. But it's good that this happens. But for me, my priority would be executive management first, train people, have coordinators, and then also work on information security strategy with a design. Know who your suppliers are, who are treating that data. Know what your customers want, because they can be more insistent on security than you think, and it's sometimes hidden in contracts. So clauses and contracts are very, very important, as you know. And then you move forward to something practical. But I would start with executive management first.
And how do we do that, Roland? Because we know by experience that just getting GDPR to the attention of the boardroom is difficult. Cybersecurity is even harder to understand for somebody who has no technical background at all. How do we make this a boardroom priority, and why should it be a boardroom priority?
Too much to lose. That's the number one thing is the losses can be gigantic, right? And one of the things that I always see go wrong is security is a problem from the DPO. This is the problem from the security guy. It's an overall board problem, and your management level needs to define what the millimil security is that should be reached. Not we need that policy on that firewall, but these are our risks. These are our biggest risks. This is the impact. And that needs to be done on all levels of a company, not only by the IT guy, not only by the security guy, not only by the DPO.
All right.
I think you agree, no?
Yeah, we do that. I think, Roland, if you try to list that into what are those legal risks, I think you have a slide on that. What should legal take into the boardroom to convince them from a legal perspective?
Yeah. Okay. Let's go to the next slide. That's for the legal audience today. It's more theoretical, because in practice we don't see much enforcement on these arguments. But it's something you can use for your boardroom to convince them to do something about cybersecurity. And on the broad question, Bart, first that you talked about, I think it's a continuous process. Security and privacy, which also conflicts. Too much security is a problem for privacy. As I look to logging, monitoring, you check your stuff too much, it conflicts with the fundamental rights of privacy. So the one and the other are not going to the same direction always. But for the boardroom, I think you can do that by, among other things, increasing the intrinsic motivation of each director. And what is this motivation? That's his own money. And from a legal perspective, you can point out to the director his or her personal liability when no proper cybersecurity measures are being taken. And in Belgian law, there is, like I said, at least a theoretical reasoning for this. And it starts all with Article 5 of the GDPR, that imposes that article the obligations in general of adequate technical and organizational measures. That's a duty. And then Article 222 of the GDPR law provides for the data controller, data processor, appointee or agent, a criminal fine between 2,000 euros and 120,000 euros if the obligation under Article 5 GDPR is not met in case of gross negligence or malice. So if you don't do anything about it, you have a criminal liability. But that's for the data controller. That's not directly for the director, except you would point him out as an appointee or an agent. But where the director wouldn't fall under the capacity of the previous article, the 222, you can use Article 230 of the Belgian GDPR law, which refers to Book 1 of the Belgian Criminal Code, and in combination with Article 5 of our Criminal Code, which gives the relation between directors and their companies, the director personally can be punished as a participant of the criminal act under Article 5 GDPR. And this criminal error will have the consequence for liability claims, civil liability claims, where the director is jointly liable with the company on the basis of Article 50 of the Belgian Criminal Code, and can fully vouch for these damage claims. And then finally, you see it above, that's an article of the Belgian Code of Economic Law. To make it a bit worse, there can be made a reference to the collective recovery procedure. So all your customers who make a collective recovery procedure, that's also been declared applicable to damage claims under GDPR. So my conclusion is that every director has enough personal reasons to give enough attention to cybersecurity compliance. And you have legal arguments to say you have an intrinsic motivation to do something with cybersecurity.
Did I just hear you say that directors of the board can be personally liable in case of a hacking incident within their organization if it turns out they didn't take proper measures in advance?
Yes, in case of gross negligence.
Yeah.
So if you don't do anything about it, it's a very difficult discussion. I don't know what the public prosecutor is going to do about that and how far it will come. But it's a theoretical argument to say there is a personal liability, a personal criminal liability for it.
Can we connect that to the principle of accountability and the need to document yourself in advance and reflect on every decision you take for the future and make sure you have that documented just in case something goes wrong in the future?
Yes, absolutely.
It's one of the things we see at the DPA, right? The worst thing that can happen to a company is not having a data leak, right? But having to report that data leak to the DPA and to the end customer and saying, we don't have a clue what happened and what is leaked. Right?
Yeah.
You should always have logging up to the level you need, right? For instance, in Belgium, at the Rex register, the Belgian public data, every access to that register is locked up to the function, the civil servant, right? You should have logging. You should have systems in place so you can tell what happened, right? We see cases coming in that they basically are saying, we don't have a clue, but nothing happened. No, that doesn't work. So it's very important to have that accountability. Roland, I had a question. Is this following the British systems? In the UK, since the 80s, an IT manager is personally liable for data breaches, right? Because I did all my audit work in the 90s in the UK, because nobody hired me in Belgium, everybody hired me in the UK. So is that comparable?
That could be comparable, but the UK is, of course,
Strange country.
Yeah, that's not a question. But if you look at liability cases in cybersecurity, you have to look to the UK and America, not the other countries of Europe. And
one of the things you should also take into account is you have a lot of legal obligations a lot of companies aren't even aware of, right? If you have a web shop and you do payments, you're liable under the PCI DSS framework, right? That can cost you a lot of money if you do that wrong, right? So it's quite a lot of stuff that goes in there, and it's more than GDPR even.
Absolutely. I refer to the different articles in Belgian law, and they're always connected with the criminal liability or another liability. And most people, if we say we don't have too much, with little awareness about cybersecurity, it's not only the technical aspects, but it's also the legal aspects of roles and responsibilities, also for your staff. If we look at shadow IT, for example, also under the GDPR, your staff can be personally be liable under the criminal liability, but also under the GDPR liability, but they don't know it. And now, when we all work at home, for example, and we use our personal computers and we process data, for our company, but not conform the policy of the company, you have a problem with the GDPR. But people don't realize that.
We have an interesting question from Patrick de Puit, directly relating to that. I think Patrick says that since there are so little big cases that are being reported in the news of data incidents, data breaches, and since the Data Protection Authority in Belgium, the Gegevensbeschermingsautoriteit, Autorité Protection Données, doesn't seem to be very active. And Patrick says, I haven't seen any fines coming into the news over the past 6 months. I don't think that's entirely correct. There have been several in the news over the past 6 months. But since there doesn't seem to be a lot of incentive coming from the government in enforcement under GDPR, just under GDPR, how should I, as a company, or how should I, as a legal officer within my company, convince my management that they shouldn't be thinking this is not going to happen to me, I am not in danger, this is not an urgency? How do I convince them that they should get moving in time? And I think, personally speaking, we know this issue from a GDPR background. It is true that the number of data breaches that are being reported in Belgium is incredibly low compared to other countries and compared to what, statistically speaking, should be the case. A lot of companies seem to have a natural reflex not to report if they have a data breach, if they run into trouble. That is on the one side, which confirms the view in the general public that data breaches are something exotic that will not happen, because if you look at the numbers, they don't exist. If you look at the numbers in other countries, to the contrary, we know that there have to be exponentially more than there are in Belgium. So how do you convince management levels, board levels in your company that this is something they should get to work with? Should you talk about potential fines? 20 million fine, 4% of your turnover under GDPR? Should we talk about potential damage to your brand identity? Or should we talk about liability and risks for them in person? How do you convince a company that this is something that needs urgent attention?
I'll pick it up. Okay, no problem. One of the things, it's not only a DPA problem, right? And in Belgium, we have this bad situation that the GBA, right, started out very late. They had a president 1 year after the GDPR got live, I thought one year after. But there's another problem, and that's going to pick up quickly. If you see guys like the Ministry of Privacy, if you see civil people picking this up. The main problem why GDPR is not implemented, in my opinion, and it's not really a strong argument yet, is merely because citizens are not using their rights. If you are a company and 1,000 people ask you insight in their data, the right to be right of information, etc., if they really start monitoring you, if they really start checking your privacy statements, and they're not okay, you're in trouble, right? You could get away with that for years, right? But that's not going to keep on being that way. People are waking up too, and I think this is the biggest danger. The GBA is flooded with work, like every DPA that there's out there. Right? We don't have enough resources. It's going to be, but the people themselves are going to use their rights, and that's going to be dangerous for companies. Or you don't agree, Roland?
Well, I was thinking in my head, what can we give as a satisfying answer to convince the board? So that was something else. Like I said, it was the personal liability. That was one argument. For the rest, we know there are several studies going on about the law and economics in cybersecurity. And one of the big discussions we have there is notification duty to the authorities in combination with high fines. And how do we convince companies to make notifications so we can share the cybersecurity information on a national basis and on an international basis. But there we see, first conclusion is the high fines. Only high fines are not enough to convince companies to make these notifications. So that's a problem.
One of the elements, maybe I'll interject. What I see in practice is that if you talk to a board or an executive management meeting, is that of course incidents draw attention. Small incidents, things that have happened, they say, okay, I was, first of all, most of the executives will say, I was not aware of that. Secondly, they will say, okay, and what has been done to avoid that next time? Which is a logical question because they're always thinking in a solution mode, not a problem mode. So that's one. Two, yes, it is a very daunting task to explain, and coming back to my question, explain to me as if I was a 6-year-old or an 8-year-old child. I think it's important that security people must be able to explain to legal or executive people as if they are 8 years old. And that sounds very demeaning, but it's not, because every group has their own lingo, their own thing. Lawyers have their own lingo. I sometimes do that, sorry, what do you mean with this word versus this word? Or why do you change in the text this word by this word? And then if they explain to me and I understand it, I'll follow it and say, oh, I learned something. But we ourselves as security people have to do the same exercise. So explaining that in a layman term, but also do not come with just, and I think that's the key question, if you only come with issues, they will kill you. They will hang you on the wall or throw you out of the window. You'll have to also come with options. And what I think is essential is that you give them options. You don't say, oh, by the way, you have to do it, otherwise you're liable and you will be in jail and blah, blah, blah. They're like, yeah, and how many of my colleagues are doing that? None. So what are you worried about? Because they're not dumb people. Huh? I think the biggest error that you can do is underestimate executives in a boardroom. That's the biggest mistake you can make. And fear, uncertainty, and doubt works once, maybe twice, but not 3 times. And also, it's a bad attitude to always come to the board with a fear, uncertainty, and doubt story. It is demeaning, and they're like, oh my God, we're not going to invite this guy ever again, or this girl ever again, because everything he brings or she brings is horror stories, but there's no solution. And I think, and there was also a question from Patrick about, yeah, we need more awareness. Yes, but in both sides. Again, if I'm the person in the news all the time or in the board all the time with negative things, they're going to wonder, is Mark actually doing something good? Is he doing actually something? I mean, and that's the main element. I also have to bring good things. And yes, ladies and gentlemen, everybody listening today, there's a lot of innovation ongoing in security. A lot of innovation is ongoing in security and in privacy technologies, but you're not aware of it because it doesn't make the news. Nobody tells you about it, and that's sad as well. So we have a job to convey to you good tools, good technologies, and it's our job also. The world is moving also in the positive sense. There are technologies that are protecting, that are getting better. There was a question about how do I know what my position is? There are tools available. You just have to know and use them.
All right. Mark, thank you. I understand from that we shouldn't base our policy on fear. Maybe from my experience, maybe the solution can be found elsewhere within the company. I work a lot for marketeers in GDPR compliance for the marketing departments in organizations. Trustworthiness and building a long-term relationship with your customer, and using privacy, data protection, and that trustworthiness as point of your company identity, and using it as a point of, or as an argument of sales toward the outside world, build that long-term relationship. That is something that is very important to marketeers today. And in that perspective, being able to communicate to the outside world or build into your brand image, we are a trustworthy partner, your data is safe with us, is a sales argument that can make money, and that way the entire cybersecurity and GDPR compliance becomes a way to make money instead of a way or a problem that you have to invest in to prevent losing money. And you can turn everything around and use this to your advantage. That is something that I've discussed over and over again with marketing people. And that's the way they tend to look at things, at least the smart ones.
It's Johan Cruijff, huh? It's every disadvantage has its advantage, right?
Yeah.
I remember before GDPR got live, one of your customers got on stage for SafeShop, and she was a marketing company, a direct marketing company, and she said, GDPR is great. It's a great opportunity for us. And she basically said, we can get a consent of all our customers now, and we can do stuff with it we couldn't do before. So she really understood our legal side of things. So it's a good approach. And no FUD, that's the most important one. Try not to sell security with fear, because it will backfire.
Yeah, as I mentioned in the chat, the main goal of a good person is that we as security experts or coordinators unburden our employees and our customers of security worries. I think that's the core value of a good thing, that you don't have to worry about it. We'll give you guidance, we'll give you training. There should be regular awareness in the organization on a regular basis. There should be some mandatory element. So in that sense, it is important that people are aware, because again, let's look at it from a practical side of view. Everybody of us have their job to do. There's a lot of work, limited number of people, so a lot of stress and timing. We don't have time to say, whoa, I have 1 hour to spare. Let me go to the security side of my company. Nobody does that. Nobody.
Guys,
So,
technical issue that has come up in the chat. There seems to be a lot of echo on the line. So if you're not talking, mute yourself for a moment so that we don't hear an echo on the line, please. We have one last interesting topic that we should move into, I think, because our time is running out. The basic thing that keeps coming back in GDPR compliance trajectories as well is the need to ensure sufficient technical and organizational measures that ensure a sufficient level of security, the need to provide data protection by design and data protection by default. Those two principles are so general and so empty that nobody really knows how to handle them. If I want to get to work and if I want to ensure proper security within my organization and I want to start taking proper technical and organizational measures, what should I be doing? And I think that Roland has a short overview of what you should think of. And maybe after that, Jan and Mark, you can give a few very practical hands-on pointers on what are the 5 things that I should really be doing within my organization. First, let's have a look at the overview that Roland has prepared.
Okay, let's see slides. Right. Well, when we look at all applicable legislation in Belgium that speaks about security obligations, we always see, in essence, the same general criteria. Namely, you have to take risk-based, adequate and proportionate technical and organizational measures. But there's a lot of uncertainty about what that exactly means. Everyone has to look for solutions themselves, and that's mainly, again, a boardroom issue. And I believe this is a risky practice. I'm talking about liability, but that's maybe because I'm a lawyer. I'm sorry for that, Mark. But again, in the context of this director's liability, we see that the courts are reticent and wish to interfere as little as possible in the free policy choices that a board must be able to make. It's not up to a court to say what your good policy, what topic it is, to say if you do it wrong or you do it right. But in the discourse of cybersecurity, we see the opposite. The freedom is left to the companies to make choices. But in the meantime, we see that the data protection authorities now, they judge and penalize post factum when a cyber incident has occurred. And of course, it's easy to be the preacher of the past, and that's a problem. What do we have to do as a boardroom? Which measures do I have to take? And there's very big, you have a lot of choices to make. So the question is, what can you do? And the golden rule seems to me to be smart, rather than trying to get fully compliant with the latest regulations. Because you can't fully comply on this part. You don't know how to comply exactly. I heard Mark say ISO is outdated. You can't use it anymore. Many companies use it and they think, okay, now I'm okay. I don't have to do anything. So there is always a continuous discussion. And the first thing I would say is prioritize. Determine what your crown jewels are, and start with the things where you know you have the most impact. In my opinion, that's again for the legal measures. Make a short overview. Legal measures still receive too little attention in the discourse of cyber security. But what can you do from a legal perspective, in short? That's, first of all, start with the vendor assessments, but the legal vendor assessment, and check the agreements with your suppliers in terms of security obligations. What do they do to secure your data, to secure your belongings? When you outsource something, like your IT suppliers, for example, which information do they give you? What transparency do they give you? Check your own terms and conditions and the limitations of your own liabilities in case of a cyber incident. That gives you also a trust. That also can be used as a marketing agreement. Besides, provide correct policies. That's more internal stuff, in which clear instructions are given to those involved in your company about passwords, about remote access tools, about business email use, about the use of shadow IT. Do you have a procedure about that? What about correct data processing, and so on and so on. Ensure that cybersecurity is also a permanent item on the agenda of the board meeting, of course. Determine in all procedures, preventively, but also in the event of a cyber incident, what role and what responsibility everyone bears, so that issue is very clear. Provide the necessary audit rounds with suppliers and customers. Mitigate your risk at least by choosing a cybersecurity insurance. That's a premature market, but choose a cybersecurity insurance that is complementary to your existing insurance policies. And finally, use the principle of cybersecurity as a routine. Cybersecurity should be an ongoing exercise and can never be a one-time assignment.
All right, that about sums it up. Now let's think about practical things you can do. Allow me to first add one thing that, again, from a GDPR perspective, has popped up regularly, and that I have the same feedback from the Data Protection Authority, from the GBA. That is the apparent lack of data protection impact assessments when people start using new software systems, new technology, new data processing. That reflects the natural thought that we should first do an impact assessment, look for risks before we get started, before we start building. Doesn't seem to have filtered into both legal and IT departments. And I think that is something that we should work on, because that is prevention, that is not running into trouble at a later stage. But then in ongoing business, Jan and Mark, what are the 5 things companies should really be doing to limit cyber risks? Jan, you first.
We don't hear him.
Jan, we can't hear you. Your sound seems to have gone.
Yeah, I turned off my mic. It's always a... No, just quickly, one of the things I always advise, and it's been touched lightly by Roland, is get a security team in action that is multidisciplinary, right? The problem we see is, and I use that quite a lot in my talks, is depending on which audience I have in front of me, I say security/privacy is too important to leave up to the lawyers in this case, or IT guys, or external consultants. You need a team that's multidisciplinary, that is able to communicate and work on this, because you cannot outsource this completely. You know your business, your team members know your business. And what I always also see quite a lot is that in a security context, the own employees are seen as a risk more than as a liability more than an asset. You can see your people as risk, but you can also see them as allies, as telling you and helping you with your security. So that's the first important thing. Second important thing is take from a management viewpoint matters. Know the processes that are happening. Steer the security process. Do not leave it to someone else because you know your company. You've got something to add, Mark? Mike?
Okay, yeah. Practical speaking, I always say that first of all, it's about awareness, making sure that everybody in their own right is aware what's allowed, what's not allowed, what they have to do, what they don't have to do. And that's not a one size fits all. That has to be tailored. HR has their messages because they deal with a lot of personal data on employees. Marketing, sales have a lot of information about customers. Procurement or purchasing has a lot of information about suppliers. So you have different stakeholders, different audiences. So you have to tailor made that. That's one. But a very important element is that everybody has a baseline. So very important that every year, at least once, mandatory, everybody follows this mandatory course. There's proof of that because audits are fine, but what auditors always say is, can you show me that they actually did, that you cover 100%? Can you show me the evidence? So if you say, yeah, just send out the mail and everybody followed it, that doesn't count. So awareness, traceability and evidence of what has been done, and then all about indeed regular coordination sessions. As I've mentioned, I don't manage security, I coordinate security. I don't manage privacy, I coordinate privacy. And so in that sense, yes, there are a lot of people involved, and that having a good practical level of segmentation. I see security clause and policies, that for me falls under governance, governance and risk. I see roles and responsibilities, that's the human element. It's about what are the roles, and yes, embedding it in a job description is nice, but how many of people that work for 10 years have read their job description? Let's be honest. It has to be practical from a perspective. If I see service level agreements, I see also operational level agreements inside and SLAs outside. So that's with customers, but also with vendors. Again, how many times do you read those SLAs? Have you actually read it completely? Do you understand what's in there? Just a small hint, in most contracts that I read, and I read a lot of them every month, there's a specific message that if there's an incident, privacy security, you have to mail to this specific mail address from my company. And that's not always privacy @ or security @ it's something different. If nobody has stored that in their customer relationship database, nobody knows, and you'll make mistake and you're legally liable. Nobody reads that stuff. A lot of people do not read the boring annexes, and you should, because it's key. From an audit perspective, yes, audits are important. I appreciate audits. I always like audits because I learn from those. So it's I do not hide anything. I am always open card for that. And insurance, cyber insurance is an important element. We have a cyber insurance agreement. Also, some customers insist that we have it, and there are a lot of options. Compared to 10 years ago when it was like a wasteland and there were some initiatives left and right. Now most companies offer cyber insurance, but again, big caveat, don't count on getting money from that. I recently had a friend of mine who reached out to me as a security officer. I have a lot of security friends in the world and in Belgium, and they said, look, what I have, we have insurance, we have an issue, and then when we had the incident, the insurance company came with this whole list that we had to provide as evidence in order to get some form of compensation. And he said, it's ridiculous. It's going to spend us more time, more effort to gather all that than just say, okay, forget it. So also reading, but also talking, again, discussing with insurance companies is key in making sure that you have a good entente of what they expect if a data breach or a security breach actually happens, that because then you would be in for a big surprise if you then have to fill that whole bucket of elements. And finally, I want to react to Jessica, who says, I do not understand why ISO 27001 is outdated. Well, Jessica and everybody else, it is outdated. It is from 2013. 2013, that's 8 years ago. 8 years in IT is light years. That was pre-social media. That was pre-cloud. That was pre all this artificial intelligence, pre-machine learning, pre all these new instances where there's no answer in the ISO 27001. That's why they're currently, luckily, revising it to make it maybe a little bit more updated. I'm not saying that updating means more domains, but at least make it tailor fit. If I read ISO, I kind of miss a lot of components that I have to tackle with today. There's no link with, a lot of components that I tackle on a weekly, monthly basis. So yes, it needs to be refreshed. There are things like CIS, there are a lot of other standards that are available that I actually use, which are much better. The Cloud Security Alliance with their control matrix, brilliant. And I think it's mandatory for everybody in the legal profession to at least know that there's something like the Cloud Security Alliance with a control matrix that's also been updated this year. It was also 6 years old. And it's updated because we have to move forward, technology move forward, and we have domains that are not captured. You can say, yeah, but it is embedded in, or it's implicitly in. Then we start in discussions that I don't want to go there. It's either in an audit, it has to be there, or it hasn't.
Thank you, Mark. We have to sum up, guys. We have 4 minutes left. Let me just add from my experience as a DPO and in GDPR compliance that awareness within your organization, training people, explaining the importance, not in annexes to contracts, not in long documents, but talking to them and showing them, leading by example is very, very important, I think. I want to thank Mark for his insights from the business world, from his own position within ESCO as a Chief Information Security Officer. I want to thank Jan for his insights as a cybersecurity specialist, much appreciated specialist. I want to thank Roland, my partner, for his work. If any of the participants are interested in getting a strong international comparative legal overview on cybersecurity regulations, including a Belgian chapter by a law firm that I will not mention by name, but you can guess which one it is. Do fill out the contact form on our website, and in the subject field, just mention the cybersecurity guide, and we will get a copy out to the 5 first people that react, and we will get 10 digital copies just of the Belgian chapter to the next 10. If you have any remaining questions in the upcoming days, do send us an email, bart@seriouslegal.be, roland@seriouslegal.be. Don't hesitate to get in touch. We won't charge you for any feedback on today's webinar, of course. If you want more information on the work that Jan does within BA, you can find him on ba.be. And Roland and Jan will be present at InfoSecurity, the #1 security privacy cloud fair in the Benelux, ladies and gentlemen. The exact date, guys, 31st of March and 1st of April.
Yep.
It will be online, it will be digital this time, and you will be able to discuss cybersecurity, GDPR compliance, privacy in general with Roland and with Jan during those 2 days.
Going to be there too. So
Mark will be there too. Sorry, Mark. So with the 3 panelists today, they will be available online at InfoSecurity to discuss any cybersecurity questions that you may have. Where can you sign up? Infosecurity.be or .com?
.be.
yeah,
.be.
too, so
And for SIE, also we organize a lot of events in Belgium, in Flemish, unfortunately, also virtually. We also have a magazine which we publish, and it's with it's a neutral, non-profit organization to share about IT knowledge. So for those who want to learn, we have lawyers in our group and our membership who want to keep up to date. So it's kind of like keeping up to date with IT knowledge.
All
Thank
right.
you. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you to the audience for listening. I see most of you stuck around until the end, despite the fact that we've been going on much longer than initially intended. Thank you for that. And I wish you all a good day and a nice weekend. And thank you.
Thank you very much for your excellent stewardship there, Bart. Again, thank you to our fantastic speakers for all of their thoughts and insights, as well as to you, our audience, for your time and your many questions and comments that came through today's session. I hope this has been an insightful webinar for all of you and that you've each taken something from today's discussion. Legal 500, just to close, we'd love to thank again Sirius Legal, our partners, for today's webinar. If you have any feedback for us about today's event, please do let me know. Jamie Ray, you can find me on. Thank you all for watching, and that concludes today's session.